My name is Jessica. I'm 36 years old, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to write something like this. I've always been skeptical about those near-death experience stories. You know, the ones where people see a bright light, meet angels, or feel an overwhelming sense of peace. I figured they were exaggerations, or maybe just the brain reacting to trauma. But now I know better, because it happened to me. And it wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. And ever since that day, I can't ignore what I saw. I need to get it out. I need to tell someone. Even if most people don't believe me, even if they think I'm crazy, I can't keep this to myself. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. And the truth? It's bigger than anything I ever imagined. I live in Atlanta, I work as a paralegal, and until this happened, my life was about as ordinary as it gets. Wake up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, repeat. My biggest worries were things like bills, traffic, and whether or not I had time to take my dog, Max, on a long enough walk. I never really thought much about life after death, and I definitely wasn't someone who looked for signs from the universe. But what happened to me on that day changed everything. It started out just like any other Thursday. Early morning coffee, the usual drive to work. The sky was heavy and gray, like it might rain later, but I didn't pay much attention. I was on autopilot, running through my to-do list in my head. And then, out of nowhere, it happened. 1 second I was gripping the steering wheel, and the next, it felt like a massive weight crushed my chest. It wasn't just pain. It was like something was squeezing the life out of me. My arms went weak, my vision blurred, and before I could even react, the wheel slipped from my hands. The next few seconds are a blur. I remember the sound of tires screeching, metal crumpling, and then nothing. Silence. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I was above it. I could see everything. My body slumped over the steering wheel, blood on my forehead, people running toward me. But I didn't feel any pain. I wasn't scared. It was like watching a movie of myself, but with this strange sense of calm, like nothing could touch me. I tried to speak, to move, but I couldn't. That's when I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating, weightless, disconnected from everything I had ever known. And then I felt it, something pulling me, gently but firmly, like an invisible force was guiding me upward. I didn't fight it. I couldn't. It felt natural, like I was meant to go wherever it was taking me. The world around me started fading. The city, the cars, the voices, it all disappeared. And then, in the distance, I saw the light. I know how cliché that sounds, but I swear it's real. And it's not like any light we see here. It wasn't blinding or harsh. It was warm, inviting, almost alive. It wrapped around me, pulling me in, filling me with this overwhelming peace. For the first time in my life, I felt truly safe, like I belonged there. As I moved toward it, I realized I wasn't alone. There were figures around me, shadowy but familiar, like I had known them before but couldn't quite place how. They weren't talking, but I could feel them welcoming me. And the closer I got to the light, the more I felt like I was going home. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even thinking about my life anymore. I just knew this was where I was supposed to be. As I got closer to the light, something shifted. It wasn't just light anymore. It felt like a presence, like it knew me. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't words, but I could feel it saying, "You're safe. You're loved." Every part of me, every insecurity, every failure, every bad decision I had ever made, just melted away. I felt whole, like I was being put back together in a way I didn't even know I needed. But then, right as I was about to fully step into it, I saw someone. At first, I thought it was just another one of those shadowy figures, but this one was clearer. As I moved closer, I realized who it was. Jesus. I know how that sounds, and I wouldn't have believed it either, but it was him. Not the way you see in paintings or movies. There was no white robe or glowing halo, but I knew it was him. His presence was so powerful, it was like everything around him vibrated with love. The moment our eyes met, I broke down. I didn't even know you could cry in a place like that, but I did. It wasn't from fear or guilt, it was from being seen. like really seen. Every part of me. He knew everything. Every time I hurt someone, every time I let myself down, every stupid decision. And he loved me anyway. There was no judgment, no anger, just acceptance. Like he had been waiting for me. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. I was overwhelmed. And the strangest thing, I didn't feel small in front of him. I felt important, like I mattered, like we all do. That's what hit me the hardest. I was standing in front of Jesus, and instead of feeling ashamed, I felt like I belonged there. I don't know how long I stood there in front of him. Time didn't feel the same in that place. It wasn't rushing or dragging, it just was. I remember trying to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work the way I wanted. It didn't matter though, because I could feel that he already knew everything I wanted to say. He looked at me with this kind of strength and gentleness that's hard to put into words. It was like he was holding me together just with his gaze. Then he said, "You are not here by accident." His voice wasn't loud, but it filled every part of me, like it was speaking directly to my soul. I felt this mix of relief and confusion because, until that moment, I thought I had died. I thought this was the end. But when he said that, I knew I was there for a reason. There was something he needed me to see. Before I could even ask what it was, everything around us started changing. The light didn't go away, but it stretched out, like it was pulling back a curtain. And what I saw next is what's been haunting me ever since. I was standing somewhere else, somewhere ancient. It wasn't like the modern world I knew. The ground beneath me was warm, and the air felt thick with life, like it was buzzing. I saw people, black people, moving with this grace and confidence that took my breath away. They weren't struggling or afraid. They were strong, united, and there was this wisdom in their eyes that felt sacred. They were connected to something, God, creation, the earth. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like they understood the world in a way we've forgotten. I watched them work, build, pray, and I felt this overwhelming respect, like I was witnessing something holy. I knew this was history, real history, but not the version we're taught. This was before slavery, before colonization. It was a time when they were leaders, healers, and keepers of a spiritual power that felt almost too big for me to understand. And the more I watched, the more I realized I wasn't just being shown the past. I was being shown what had been stolen. Then the vision shifted, and what I saw next shattered me. The golden cities, the unity, the sacred knowledge. It was all being torn apart. I saw chains. I saw ships. I saw people screaming, reaching for their loved ones as they were ripped away from their homes. The pain in their eyes was unbearable, but it wasn't just fear or suffering. It was loss, something deeper than the physical. It was like a part of their identity was being stolen, stripped away with every step onto those ships. I saw them shackled together, barely able to stand, forced onto boats that smelled of death and despair. But what hit me the hardest was the way they were treated, not just as property, but as nothing. Every part of their history, their power, their connection to God, erased. I felt this ache in my chest, this anger rising in me, because it was so clear that this wasn't just about physical slavery. This was about severing something spiritual, something sacred, something that had existed for thousands of years. I turned to Jesus, and I'll never forget the look on his face. There was sorrow, deep sorrow, but also something unshaken, like he already knew that the truth couldn't stay buried forever. The vision kept shifting, moving through time, showing me things I never learned in school. I saw how generations were forced to forget who they were. I saw children beaten for speaking their native tongues, families torn apart, entire cultures erased or rewritten. I saw how faith was weaponized against them, how they were given a version of God that was designed to keep them obedient instead of powerful. And I saw the spiritual war behind it all, forces, dark and relentless, working to ensure that this truth never came to light. It wasn't just about control, it was about fear. Because if these people ever remembered who they truly were, the world would change. I turned back to Jesus, my mind racing, and he finally spoke again. They were chosen, he said, his voice steady, absolute. And that is why they were feared. My entire body shuddered. It made sense. It all made sense. This wasn't just history. This was a plan, a centuries-long plan to keep an entire people from stepping into their true identity. And for the first time, I understood why I was being shown this. This truth wasn't just for me. It was meant to be spoken. What hit me the hardest in that moment was realizing how deep the deception ran. It wasn't just about physical chains or forced labor. Those were horrific, but they were only part of it. This was about disconnecting a people from their divine inheritance. Jesus showed me that these people had once held a unique spiritual understanding, a connection to God that was ancient and powerful, something that had been entrusted to them. And the systems of oppression weren't just built to break their bodies. They were built to erase their memory of who they truly were. I saw centuries of lies, manipulation, and violence designed to make them believe they were inferior. But beneath all that suffering, I saw something else, a light that never went out. Even in the worst of it, their spirit was never fully broken. That connection to God, though buried, was still there, and it was starting to rise again. Jesus made it clear, what had been hidden was going to come to light, and no force on earth could stop it. I turned to him, tears streaming down my face, and asked the only thing I could think of. Why me? Why was I being shown this? I wasn't special. I wasn't a historian or a preacher. I was just a woman from Atlanta who had been worrying about paying her credit card bill a few hours earlier. He looked at me with that same love and certainty and said, "Because you will speak." Those words sank into me like a weight, but they also lit something inside me, like I had just been given a responsibility I couldn't walk away from. He told me the world was on the brink of a shift, that the truth would begin to surface, but it would be resisted. There would be those who fought to keep it buried, who would use fear, division, and confusion to hold people back. But the awakening had already begun, and he needed people, ordinary people, to speak, to help others see. That was why I was there. That was why I was being sent back. My heart was racing, but I knew I had to say yes. Before I could process what he had just told me, I felt it, the pull. That same force that had brought me into the light was now pulling me back. But this time, it felt different. It was urgent, like my time there was up. I panicked. I didn't want to leave. I was terrified that if I went back, I'd forget everything. I begged him, "Please, let me stay just a little longer." But he shook his head gently, like a parent who knows what's best, even when you don't understand. "You must speak," he said again. And then everything around me, Jesus, the light, the visions, started to fade. I was falling, fast, but it wasn't painful. It was like being dropped into cold water after standing in the sun. The warmth was gone, and everything felt heavy. I gasped for air as my eyes shot open, and I was back in my body, back in the hospital, with machines beeping and nurses moving around me. My chest ached, and I could feel bandages on my head, but none of that mattered, because I knew what I had just seen was real. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Physically, I was recovering, but mentally, I felt like I was in two worlds at once. I would hear the hum of the hospital machines, but in my mind, I was still hearing his voice. I would close my eyes, and I was back in that ancient place, seeing those faces, the strength in them, the pain, the unbroken spirit. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftop, but the few times I tried to talk about it, people looked at me like I was crazy. My sister tried to be supportive, but I could see it in her eyes. She thought I was confused, maybe traumatized from the accident. Friends changed the subject or said, "That's deep," but I knew they didn't believe me, and that crushed me, because I wasn't making this up. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. Jesus had shown me something that needed to be told, and no matter how scared I was, I knew I had to speak. So, I started speaking, quietly at first. I told a few people, hoping someone would understand. But the more I talked, the more I realized how hard this truth was for people to accept. It wasn't just about believing in near-death experiences. What I was saying challenged everything, about history, faith, identity. Some people dismissed me, said my mind was just processing trauma. Others got angry, like I was trying to stir something up. But there were a few, just a few, who leaned in when I spoke. Their eyes lit up, like they had felt it too, like something deep inside them was waking up. And that's when I knew, this is why I came back. It wasn't to convince everyone. It was to reach the ones who were ready, the ones who needed to hear it. Because this awakening isn't going to come from a pulpit or a headline. It's going to come from us, from people who've seen the truth and are brave enough to speak it. I wish I could tell you that after that, everything got easier. It didn't. I faced resistance, not just from people, but from something darker. There were nights I woke up feeling like there was a presence in my room, heavy and suffocating, like it wanted me to stop. I started getting strange calls, silent or just breathing. I had posts online disappear without reason. At first it scared me, but now I'm not afraid anymore, because I know what I saw. I know what Jesus told me, and I know this truth is bigger than fear. If you're reading this, maybe you were meant to. Maybe you felt it too, that something in the world is shifting, that there's more to who you are than you've been told. If that's you, then listen. You were never nothing. You were always more. And now, it's time to remember. The awakening is already happening. You just have to decide. Will you stay asleep or will you rise?